Morning. Vince is going to be the last thing between you and lunch, so I know that it'll be a very interesting conversation, and I think you'll get a lot out of this presentation. And Vince is a all-around great guy who his bio just doesn't quite fully account for all the things that he does. But Vince Torres is the founder of Santa Fe Christian, a small elementary school serving children in kindergarten through 5th grade. Together with his wife Tiffany and 2 other families, Vince founded the school in 2022 to address a growing need and demand for quality education in a Christian environment. He now serves as a volunteer for the school, managing donor relations and grant writing. Vince has more than 15 years of experience in public policy and community leadership. He currently serves as the chief of staff for the New Mexico Senate Republican leader and pastors in his local church, a job that he and I interact with each other pretty regularly in. And like I said, just absolutely top-notch. And I'm sure that the kids at your school are getting a great education. So Vince and Tiffany have been married for 15 years. They have 2 children who attend Santa Fe Christian. They met while attending Liberty University, where Vince earned his bachelor's and master's degrees in government and business management. We're going to have this presentation a little bit differently. We're going to have a conversation. I'm going to ask him some questions. Vince, would you prefer people have pressing issues? Would you prefer they just jump in, or would you prefer they wait till the end?
Yeah, I would say I want this to be as helpful, as informative to all of you here. So if you have a question, jump in right away, and we'll just make this more of a conversation, which I think would be helpful for everyone.
All right, great. You are a lifelong New Mexican, aside from time at Liberty University. You know the political situation as well as the educational situation in New Mexico. Just talk about that background and what spurred you to be involved in this educational model.
Yeah, so as Paul mentioned, I'm a lifelong New Mexican. I grew up in Espanola, about 30 miles north of Santa Fe. We moved to Santa Fe when I was in high school, and then after a stint in college, came back to New Mexico, met my wife in Virginia. She's from Rhode Island, so I took this ocean gal and brought her where we have very little water. But we settled down here for a while, and obviously the political landscape was very, very challenging for us, being the conservatives that we were. But more importantly, we saw that the ability for us to raise our family in this environment was just going to be incredibly challenging. New Mexico seemed to be at the top of every bad list, at the bottom of every good list. And so we had a heart-to-heart conversation and realized that either one, we needed to move somewhere else. And as you've probably seen, New Mexico right now is facing an exodus of people who simply just want to seek better options for their families and their children. But my wife and I, we seriously had that conversation about leaving. And right before my son was born, we spent some time in prayer and said, all right, Lord, do you want us to move on, or do you want us to stay here? And we ended up buying our house in Santa Fe, and that was our moment where we decided we're staying put. We are going to be here. But if we're going to be here, we're not satisfied to allow this just to stay the same. So if we're going to stay in this community, if we're going to stay in this state, we want to make sure that we are improving it. And so we figured 3 ways that we could effectively do that, being that we had the backgrounds that we had, was we could impact that in the faith community because of our involvement with the church, that we could impact that in education because of my wife's background in education, and we could also help impact public policy because of my political background. And so that was kind of the process that began the planning of Santa Fe Christian, and it took many, many years. And I'm happy to say that last year we had our first year over at Santa Fe Christian, a small micro school. We started with 20 kids last year, had an incredible year, and this year we actually doubled in size. We're up to 40. I was sharing with some folks, we have some other interested families that I think are going to be coming back around, and so it wouldn't surprise me even if we hit 50 kids this year.
Thank you, Rebecca. Feel free to engage as well as you'd like to. So people want to start cheers or the wave, we're good. New Mexico is not a state that's especially easy when it comes to regulations. That's general rule, as you know, from your job with the Senate Republicans, specifically in education and private education, it's certainly challenging as well. And then there's the city of Santa Fe, which is a whole different can of worms. Just talk about the legal and other challenges that you faced or continue to face with your school.
I think one of the things that I appreciated about the session that preceded this is Don and Ashley here spoke about the efforts of the micro school community to stay very broad in their definitions and understandings of things. And that's particularly helpful here in a state like New Mexico, because believe it or not, while we are incredibly out of control when it comes to regulations in some areas, one of the areas that we actually don't regulate all that much is private education. In fact, the only statutory references that we have to private schools in New Mexico right now involve attendance. So as I was sharing with Ashley, we have to closely resemble the school calendar in Santa Fe because that's the district in which our school is. And then when it comes to immunization records, we have to maintain those and be in compliance with the Department of Health. Outside of that, the state really doesn't involve itself in what we are doing, and that's incredibly helpful to us. You managed the other uphill climb that we had, and that had to do more with our building. We did have to go before the city of Santa Fe to get a special use permit. It was mentioned in the session prior that one of the natural locations for a micro school is a house of worship, because even as a pastor myself, I can tell you most church buildings sit pretty vacant throughout the week. They're very busy over the weekends, but during the week, very little happening there. They have classrooms, they have restrooms, they have all the sort of infrastructure that you would need for a school. And so we went to one of our local churches in Santa Fe and said, look, we'd love to talk about renting or leasing your building from you. And by God's grace, this church came forward and say, we want this to actually be our donation and investment. So I tell you what, just use it for free. And we were like, that's awesome. That's even better than us renting or leasing it from you. So we're currently housed at a church, but one of the things that it did require is us going to the city of Santa Fe to get a special use permit to operate in this particular building. And believe it or not, that was a lengthy process, an expensive process. They made us do a $6,000 traffic study on the impact that it would have to the traffic on Old Pecos Trail for a school of 20 kids. But we paid the $6,000, and then we took it to the Board of Adjustment, and the board didn't like our traffic study. Even though we used the vendor that they said, use this guy, we used him. And we actually barely got our special use permit by one vote on that committee. It was the chairman of the committee who actually cast the tie-breaking vote, and I was thankful because even though he was the chairman of the committee and typically goes with many of the others, he said on this issue, he's like, I don't understand why we're making a big deal out of this in a time when Santa Fe is in desperate need of more options for kids in their education coming out of the pandemic. Why are we going to make a headache about somebody that's trying to bring something valuable to our community? So he voted for us, we put it through, and thankfully we got that special use permit. So yeah, definitely some headaches along the way. I will say, like any other organization that's filed for federal paperwork, we did decide to actually get our 501c3, and that had more to do with opening up greater opportunities for funding and fundraising. So we went through that process, and as you know, getting information from Washington, D.C. and the IRS is extremely challenging, especially as we know now, if you're a conservative organization, you tend to get thrown on the bottom of the pile. But thanks to Congresswoman Harrell and some friends in Washington, D.C., we got our application through. And so Santa Fe Christian is not only registered with the federal government, but with the state as a nonprofit organization. That's been helpful for us in many, many ways.
Santa Fe never disappoints. It's always, God bless you for being one of the few, the proud right. People to the right of Bernie Sanders in Santa Fe. Now, why micro schools? Santa Fe is a city, as liberal as it may be. It does have Christian and Catholic schools throughout, but you chose a different model of your own creation. What specifically attracted you to the micro school idea?
The short of it is the flexibility, I think, was the biggest thing for us. Obviously, starting a school is quite an uphill climb, and you're not necessarily going to get the numbers that you need to justify, a teacher for each grade. And so we knew right out the gate that we were going to have some combined classrooms, which, by the way, turned out to be incredibly helpful. If you think of what happened during COVID when so many of our kids lost, in some cases, 2 full years of their education, we found that combined classrooms actually served as a tremendous asset to our school, and that we had some of our older kids, who were quite far behind some of our younger kids who were a little bit in the middle of the road. And so that learning gap, that achievement gap that we know already exists here in New Mexico was only exacerbated by the pandemic, and we got a front row seat to that. So microschooling provided us, I think, just the flexibility for us to be a little bit outside the box when it came to how our classrooms were structured, the type of staff that we hired. Just the day-to-day programming is incredibly flexible. We do lots of field trips. We bring in a lot of special guest speakers. I remember at the end of last year, it was awesome. We spent the whole day with some local beekeepers who brought bees, and also spent some time with some other folks who were archaeologists. I mean, we've had some amazing opportunities to provide our students with a lot of things that they wouldn't necessarily get in public school right now. But in addition to that, I think the other thing that really drew us to the microschool model is we recognize these kids need more one-on-one attention. A teacher in a classroom of 35 kids, I can't relate to the pressures that brings. And I have to think that if you're in that situation, you're trying your best to teach somewhere in the middle, because there's no way you can reasonably handle the needs of kids who are all over the spectrum when it comes to their education. And so for us, small classrooms right now, this year, our largest classroom is 15 kids, and that's big for us. That's max. Like we shut down enrollment at that number. Ideally, we like to stay at 12 or under. One of our classes this year is 4 kids, and they got a teacher with 4 kids all to themselves. I mean, where else can you get that sort of attention? Most of our other classes are 7 or 8 kids. And we've just really seen the benefit, especially for these children who lost so much during the pandemic, recognizing that at our school, they're not just a number. They're not just going to be passed along so that they're somebody else's problem. We're going to identify where they're at, and we're going to serve them exactly where they are.
So we did talk about some questions that we were going to ask ahead of time, but I'm going to throw that to the wind here for a few minutes. As somebody who's genuinely interested in microschools, but my kids go to a traditional Catholic school, and I'm not very familiar because microschools are a relatively new thing. I want to know about those teachers. How do they teach physically? Do you have a English teacher that teaches all levels? Do the math teachers switch off, or is it one teacher kind of in the classroom with that grade level of kids? What's kind of the model that you have in the school? And is that the same model that's used by most microschools? Or how did you settle on that particular setup?
Based on my study of microschools and even the previous session, again, which was incredibly helpful, again, it's all over the place as far as what microschools utilize. In our situation, we do use a bit more of a traditional model. We do have one teacher in our classrooms who teach all the subjects, which is, pretty appropriate, I think, for the smaller kids that we serve. As we move into middle school and high school, there are conversations about expanding to bring in specialized teachers who can just teach math or teach science. But for right now, every classroom has one teacher who's dedicated to that group of kids. We also have some former retired educators who come in and volunteer their time as teachers' aides. And what we utilize them for is some of those kids who are struggling in a specific area. Those retired teachers will then take them and spend an hour with them in reading, or spend an hour with them in math, and give them some one-on-one attention. So if you go to Santa Fe Christian, it's not going to be something that's completely outside the norm. You're going to see something that in many ways actually resembles a traditional school if you walk into a classroom. At the same time, what you're also going to see is a lot more one-on-one attention to the kids than you would probably ever see in a public school, with lots of flexibility. And I think the other thing that will set us apart from the public education system is we demand a lot of our families. Like our parents, we interview every family before they come into the school, and one of the conversations my wife, who's the head of school, has with every parent that comes in is, you have expectations of us. Well, guess what? We have expectations of you. And this is a partnership. In fact, the primary education of your child is not our responsibility, it's your responsibility. And so long as you recognize that we are coming alongside you as a partner in your child's education, this is going to be a good fit. And some of our families, honestly, that we've interviewed have just said, no, that's not really for us. Like, we like to drop our kids off. They're your thing. They're your problem. And we're like, that's just not how we operate. So you get a lot more parental involvement, lots of moms and dads showing up during the school day to volunteer in the classroom, lots of grandparents. I mean, our grandparents love to come in and serve. So we do Grandparents' Day, we do Donuts with Dads often, we do other events, Tea with Mom, type thing. And you just get a lot more community, family-like involvement. And I think that has really, really played itself out in such a way that you see that when the parents are that heavily invested, it's nice to know for our teachers especially that when they're going home, everything that's been taught during the day is being reinforced at home. It's a game changer for them. And our teachers, as a result, are incredibly happy.
So you mentioned you're a 501c3, which means you resemble the Rio Grande Foundation, for lack of a better word, and that means you have a board of directors. It means that fundraising is critical. Can you talk about that legal structure and what other legal structures people might choose? You kind of mentioned that was a choice. What other structures would that involve? And then talk about the fundraising aspect of keeping your school going.
I think there's a big advantage to flying under the radar as much as possible with this particular model. And so despite the fact that we did get our 501c3 and register with the state, I can tell you that we like to lay low in Santa Fe, especially because we're in Santa Fe. Our pushback before the city council was just a taste, I felt, for us of what we could anticipate. We had a neighbor who apparently hates the church, so it really wasn't about our school, but we had a neighbor who hates the church who tried to get the whole neighborhood to oppose our application. And it was interesting, at the same time, the city was still doing all of the hearings by Zoom, and the night that she showed up to testify against our license, her mic on her computer wouldn't work. And so they kept trying to go back to her, and every time they would go back, they couldn't hear her, so her testimony never got entered. So we took that as a divine sign that the Lord clearly wanted us to make it through the process. But I think there is something to flying, below the radar a little bit. We had interviews, requests from the Santa Fe New Mexican, other newspapers who wanted to talk about this new school that was starting up. And I told our staff, just don't even respond. Like we don't want to be in the news at this particular point. But as far as the structure, we did do the 501c3 route primarily so that we could fundraise and offer tax donation statements to our donors. To your point, I mean, this, starting a nonprofit organization, it takes money to do this. And even though we are tuition based, I can tell you that right now tuition does not cover our costs. We're just not there yet. And so in order to keep tuition affordable and in order to offer tuition assistance, which that was another thing that we decided, we did not want to be a country club micro school where only the affluent who could pay full tuition could show up. And so we decided we were going to offer tuition assistance to those who needed it. I can tell you that roughly 50% of our kids receive some form of tuition assistance, some a little bit, some a lot. But that requires a tremendous amount of fundraising. And so I'm kind of in charge of fundraising for the school. So I make a lot of phone calls, throughout the week and over the weekends to donors about supporting us. We just had our annual golf tournament fundraiser at TOA in Powaka. That was incredibly successful. And then the other big thing that we've been a recipient of, which was a game changer for us, is with the help of the Daniels Fund and Vela. We got some seed money at the beginning to really get this thing going. So the Daniels Fund was just a huge part of us getting up and running. And so I know Peter Drudge is here somewhere. Peter knows how thankful we are for that. But Peter also connected us with Vela, who do $10,000 micro grants for startups and parent entrepreneurs. So we were fortunate to be the recipient of a $10,000 micro grant last year from Vela, which then qualified us for a Next Step grant, which we are currently in the process of applying for. And those grants can go all the way up to $50,000. And then we also had a local family foundation in Santa Fe kick in $10,000 to buy all of our kids tablets and laptops last year. So again, takes a lot of work, takes a lot of money, a lot of fundraising. But I can tell you, to echo what you all said, people are getting a lot more comfortable with this model because we're starting to show some tangible results. And because of that, people are willing to open up their pocketbooks. And so we have found that, believe it or not, I don't want to say this and jinx us, but we have found it relatively easy to fundraise for this school. In fact, last year, I'll just share with you, we raised about $250,000 last year. And that is just an incredible thing. Rebecca Dow was a big part of that. In fact, she was a speaker at one of our dinners that we had to thank our donors. And so, again, as people get the word and find out what you're doing and that you can actually show the life-changing impact that a structure like this can have on a kid, it's a rather easy ask. I've asked for money for political candidates. That's a heck of a lot harder to raise money for a politician. It's another thing to go to a family and say, hey, if you'd like to be a part of what we're doing, there's a kid who's going to be in this school who might otherwise not be able to. Are you willing to be part of that? And we've had several folks step forward and say, here's $7,500. I want to pay for another kid to go.
Okay, so you used what I believe is an acronym there, VELA. I don't know what VELA is, if you could elaborate on that. And then you have a board of directors because you are a C3. Talk about how you structure that board, and is it mostly parents or is it somewhat parents, and how integral having a good board is in terms of not only fundraising but also the mission of the school, because it's easy to have that drift as there's turnover on the board.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so VELA is the name of the organization, VELA. You can go to their website, all of their information is there. And it's not just microschools that they help fund projects as a whole, anything that's a little bit outside the box that is going to contribute to bettering education, especially in communities of need like we have. They've proven to be just an excellent organization, so I'd encourage you to look them up. Yeah, we have a board of directors that oversees the school. Right now it's comprised of 6 individuals. We can have up to 7 members on our board, and each individual was strategically selected for some of the reasons that you mentioned. Number one, we wanted a board that recognized that their primary responsibility is the financial health of the school. So they all are fundraising, they're all doing fundraisers, they've all written checks themselves. But the other thing that we wanted to make sure is that the school maintained its mission and its vision over time, that it did not sway depending on who we brought in or who was hired, or if I was no longer part of the school or my wife who helped start it going. We wanted a board in place who would be able to continue that mission and vision. And so we selected each of our board members, and they are currently all about halfway through their term. And we have just a diversity of people on there. We have a financial advisor with Ameriprise. We have another individual who was a very senior level executive with Edward Jones. We have a retired physician and state representative. We have a local pastor, who serves on the board. And then we have one of our founders. We decided that we would only have one of us on the board. And so one of our founders is on the board. Her name is Kat. She was one of the members who helped us start the school. And so she's on the board. And then we have another person who recently had to step off for some personal reasons that they were going through with their children, who got very, very sick, but she was a former educator. And so again, just trying to hit all of these places to maximize our effectiveness and make sure that we're following through with the mission, which is to provide a Christian, academically superior and expanding education experience for our students.
Go ahead, Tim. Yeah. No, I just, you can speak up, yeah.
Okay. You mentioned tangible results. Could you just spend a minute, what tangible results have you seen in just your short 2 years?
What are the tangible results associated with the school?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tim. And one of the things that we decided to do, and I'm so thankful that we did this because it was expensive. We didn't realize we had these good friends who could probably provide it at a reduced rate, but we had to buy licenses for all of our assessments. And so all of our students last year were assessed as they came in. We wanted to know exactly what we were working with and where our children were. To no surprise, our kids coming out of public schools, every single one of them at least a full year behind, some of them almost 2 years behind. And so imagine that we had 3rd graders who were reading at a first or kindergarten level, 1st grade proficiency in math. And so we assessed them as they came in, and then we assessed them by year end. And this is something I'm so particularly thankful and proud of. I can tell you that by the end of this last school year, every child who was behind made it up completely and tested proficient in reading and math in 9 months. In 9 months. And our kindergarten class, who again didn't suffer from the pandemic, but got the benefit of being in this high quality, lots of demand, lots of parental involvement. Our kindergarten class, they're now our 1st grade class, on the Iowa assessment, they tested in the 99th percentile in reading, and they tested in the 96th percentile in math. Our average kindergartner left kindergarten reading at almost a 2nd grade reading level. And so again, small classrooms, parental involvement, high standards. I think one of the things that we've seen that I've experienced over this last year is we really underestimate what these kids are capable of. And it seems like more and more here in New Mexico, we are frequently just trying to teach to the lowest common denominator rather than recognizing that these kids are capable of so much more. And it blew my mind. Our kindergarten class was impressive. But again, they didn't have to endure the pandemic. I was so much more impressed with our 3rd and 4th graders who lost a year or 2 of their education and within 9 months made it up. That is absolutely incredible. And so to answer your question, tangible results, that's the big one. The other side of it though, and this is just as important for us as a faith-based school, we're helping foster and create good boys and girls who are going to become quality men and women who are going to contribute to our community and society. They're not being bombarded with all of the junk that is being added to public education. They're not being exposed to critical race theory. They're not being exposed to all the woke agenda. They're not being exposed to hypersexualization of students that's happening right now. They're actually just coming in and they're not getting questioned about their pronouns or how they identify. They're just learning how to read and they're learning how to do math. And that's incredible. And on top of it, they're learning how to be good human beings. So happy about the academic standards, but I can also tell you, I'm so happy when I walk into our school because there's a level of innocence there that you can see. And it is vastly different than some of the experience I had when my daughter was in public school. Yes. Yes.
The question was kinder through 5th is the age group, and the answer is yes. All right, well, as you know, I know less about this model than I know about anything else involved in this conference. So maybe I'll have to have you on the podcast to discuss that and rectify that situation. But one of my questions is, given the obvious success and the likelihood of popularity, what are your growth plans and what are your growth limits? When does a micro school become no longer a micro school, for example? And is that a self-imposed rule, or is this something that the city, through its zoning and lovely ordinances, or the state has in place that as you grow, you have to evolve? I know nothing about these, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, right now our plan is to grow by at least 1 grade every year, with the idea that eventually we will somewhat separate into a middle school and a high school so that we can again keep the model small. You asked about specific numbers, and again in my research, and this was also substantiated by the previous session speakers who are an expert on this. You know, there are some micro schools across the country who serve in excess of 100 kids. Again, there's not like a specific number tied to it. It has more to do with, you know, who's running the school, who started the school, what's the structure look like. And for the purposes of what we're talking about, I just love the idea of keeping it very, very flexible as to what those things look like. So our hope is that we would one day be a school in Santa Fe who's serving in excess of 100 kids. Whether that's, you know, all in an elementary school or whether we again continue to grow and add our middle school and high school. But we think this is something that's absolutely necessary, not just simply because of our faith-based component, but again, the quality of education that is just sorely lacking in our community right now. That's one of the reasons my wife and I started this school. We would have been happy just to continue to homeschool our kids in the wake of the pandemic. My daughter was in public school. We pulled her out because we sensed like what they were talking about was not going to work. And it did not work. And so we're thankful that we did that, but we also recognize that not every family has the resources to be able to homeschool. We have many families in our community who both parents are having to work, or we have single moms or single dads that are part of our school. So what options are available to them? And I think as we move forward, there's a reason that these sort of homeschool models, homeschool co-ops, micro schools, and everything are blowing up, because I think if there was a silver lining to the pandemic as it relates to education, is I think more and more families and parents saw that what was being provided in many cases by public education was just completely insufficient at best, or at worst incompatible with what they wanted and what they desired for their family and for their children's education.
So I know my kids, you know, obviously they want to have good classmates and good teachers, but you got to have a playground for recess, you got to have sports teams, you got to have those kinds of things. How do you handle those accoutrements?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, and obviously with the little kids, I mean, the socialization component I think is one that's very, very helpful. Especially when you talk about some of our homeschool families. That's one of the draws that they had to Santa Fe Christian was, here was something where they could continue to get the quality of education they wanted, but in a social environment. To your point, I know sports are big right now. At the same time, I think we all recognize that statistically, the overwhelming majority of our kids are not going to go pro. They're not going to play for Coach Prime at Colorado. They're not going to be in the NFL. But recognizing the value that those sorts of things bring, I can tell you some of the extracurricular activities that we do offer at Santa Fe Christian right now is we have a very vibrant music program. We have a music teacher who comes in every week and teaches our kids music, and thankfully not the recorder. I hate that thing. So they're not learning the recorder. They're learning drums, guitar, piano. They're learning vocals. We also have a Spanish teacher who comes in every week and offers Spanish. A very, very gifted art therapist who comes in and offers art each and every week to our kids. And thankfully, we have in Santa Fe an independent league so that come this winter, we're actually going to be able to start a boys basketball team. So we're very, very excited about that and offer cheerleading for the girls. So there's opportunities. Again, it's not as easy being a small school, but one of the things that we have seen in our community is that sports is an important thing. And so as we grow, we're going to try to take advantage of as many opportunities we have to offer as much to our students. But again, that's not our primary focus. It's not our primary focus. And even with my kids, my boy loves basketball, he loves football, he loves everything, but he understands that the reason he's at Santa Fe Christian is because much more important than his sports education is his Christian education that mom and I are paying for, and that's why we started this school. And so we embed that into our own kids, and hopefully I think that's one of the draws for our other families is they recognize that if we have to prioritize what we are doing with our kids, how about we put their education at the very, very top?
All right, I'm about to ask my last question. We have a little over 10 minutes to go, so please come up with a question or two for Vince. But threats to the future of this school. Now, we have about the most hostile governor you could imagine. Her public education department has not been, I don't know, for the lack of a better word, they haven't been super involved and active, which is probably to our preference given the politics that they have. But they could easily wake up on the wrong side of the bed, tomorrow or next week, and suddenly come after you in some way, shape, or form. What are the things that, if for lack of a better word, keep you up at night, or what are the threats that you see out there, whether it's the city of Santa Fe or the state of New Mexico?
Regulation is obviously the biggest threat to what we are doing. And again, that's one of the reasons I'm thankful that for all the things New Mexico does wrong when it comes to regulation of what we're doing, it's very, very loose at this point. Again, doesn't mean that they can't decide to come after us. Like in many ways, like they have the charter school movement here in Santa Fe. I work at the Capitol during the legislature, and each and every year we're seeing, legislation to, slap charter schools with moratoriums or limitations in general on their ability to grow and to serve more children. I think one of the benefits that we have, and quite frankly, this is why we have structured it as such, is at this point, I get nothing from the government. Nothing. I don't take a dime. We don't take a penny from the government. There's nothing they can hold over us. They can't say, well, you have to change in this area or else we're going to pull this funding. In some ways, we find ourselves like the state of Texas in that regard. Texas has so much money, the federal government will often come and try to tell them what to do, and they're like, that's okay, we'll just pay for it ourselves then. And that's where Santa Fe Christian kind of is right now. If you wanted to come in and say, well, we're not going to give you this money, we're just going to kind of be in a position of, that's okay, we'll take care of it then. And so I think that one of the things that we just need to continue to do is to, in some ways, stay loose on what we're doing and how we're defining what we're doing, but also not needlessly be rabble-rousers of what we're doing either to bring more attention. I think some of the best things that are happening right now in New Mexico are happening quietly because we recognize that we don't have friendlies in Santa Fe or in the governor's office right now. And if I've taken anything from the attack on charter schools, it's exactly what you said, that at any moment they could wake up and decide we want to now regulate all of these things. The governor tried to do it with her public health orders and tried to shut down a lot of the Christian schools who were operating privately here in New Mexico, and she had some success with that. So again, we're always aware that these days, under the guise of a public health emergency, it seems like this governor thinks that she can do anything she wants. Thankfully, a federal judge disagreed a couple weeks ago. But there's lots more to be done, and I think in that regard, we want to continue as far as opportunities, Paul, that you mentioned. School choice is a big thing. I agree with your keynote speaker this morning. As parents, we have the rights to decide what the best education is for their children, and no child should be doomed to fail in their education simply because of the zip code that they reside in, and let's give families and parents more choices.
Rebecca?
What were some of the funding sources that helped you get started, and how are you utilizing 529s?
She asks, what are some of the funding sources?
That helped you get started?
Yeah. As far as funding sources go, again, lots of private philanthropy. I told all of our board members to do what I do when I fundraise for nonprofits or special projects. I start with a list of 10 people that I know will give me something. I literally write their names on a piece of paper, 10 people. It's usually family and close friends, but people that I know if I call them and I ask them, they're going to give me something. And usually that's good for, in my case, for at least $500. So you start there, and then you have a board of 7 people who do that. All of a sudden you have some seed money. We also did a massive fundraiser. It was interesting the way all that played out. Again, another miracle from above, but we had prepared to purchase a really nice ATV, and we were going to raffle it off. Well, the local dealership here in Albuquerque got an offer on the ATV that we had already signed that we were going to purchase, and he sold it out from under us about a week before we were supposed to start the raffle. And the same day that happened, a friend of ours called me up and said, my wife and I have this 1968 Chevy Camaro, and we were going to sell it, but we decided we just want to give it to you guys. And so we raffled off a 1968 Chevy Camaro, raised about $96,000 off of that raffle. And then from there, again, took advantage of every opportunity. Rebecca's really good at just sending me emails with, here's some potential money, and we applied for everything and anything that we could find. We just threw it at the wall and see if it would stuck. Thankfully, with Daniels and the Vela Fund, it stuck, so that was absolutely integral. And thanks to some work of the legislature this last year, you mentioned 529s. New Mexico is now in compliance with what the federal law states with the Federal Cruz Amendment, and so you can now use your 529 contributions to that fund to help actually pay for private school here in New Mexico. And so money that you put in, get a little bit of tax break, and then you can actually use that money to pay for private school. So we have actually a lot of our families, a lot of our parents now who are just dumping their tuition money into the 529 and then turning around and using it to pay for their tuition, and they get a little bit of a tax benefit from it. So that's been helpful. He asks if the use of 529s have to be tied to an accreditation process. No. Not at all. If he asked if that ever came up during the time as far as whether a 529 could be used at a non-credited private school, and it never came up, so don't ask, don't tell. Yes, sir.
Congratulations on your bulwark.
Thank you.
Against modernism. I think it was Pius the 10th that actually said that modernism was the summation of heresy.
Hmm.
And congratulations on that. Is there an association for microschools that could create some sort of advocacy group that might be some protection against regulation and government education?
So I didn't know the answer to that question. He asks, is there an association to help micro schools, and especially maybe help with some of the legal challenges that may come? I didn't know of any, but I found out during the previous session that the answer is yes. It's one of the speakers that we had. And so the folks here from the Micro School Association, my understanding is that's exactly what they do what they offer. They have partnerships, they have resources that micro schools can now tap into. I asked the question about them even perhaps starting an accreditation process for micro schools, and I was extremely excited to hear that is in the works. They also mentioned that they have retained a legal counsel to help micro schools who may be facing some legal challenges or unreasonable pushback from the local governments. It's interesting. If it's Daniel Sewer from Wisconsin. Yeah. So, yeah, I know Daniel Sewer very well. He was the chief of staff for Lieutenant Governor Rebecca Kleefisch when I was the chief of staff for Lieutenant Governor John Sanchez. And so Daniel and I go way back. So when you mentioned his name, I'm like, it's great to hear that he's still in the fight. But Daniel and his organization and his law firm have been fighting these battles for many, many, many years and helping especially religious organizations push back against some of the unreasonable pushback. I can tell you one of the benefits that we have as a religious institution is we do have some special protections in federal law that keep us from having to necessarily just always take it when it comes to what the government is doing. In fact, we were this close to potentially being on the verge of a religious discrimination lawsuit with the city because we had actually found out that within a matter of months before our application, they had just approved another private school just literally within a rock's throw from where we were. They approved them with flying colors, just sent them through the process. And so we thought, hey, maybe this is another funding mechanism. Maybe the city of Santa Fe will build our school. Didn't go that way, and we're happy. We don't want to be litigious in that regard. But yeah, this organization here is incredible, and I'm excited to get to know more about what they do.
All right, let's give Vince a round of applause.